Welcome to Beyond Illusions, where we explore transformative books, lectures, and ideas to uncover truths that enrich your life. In each episode, we challenge harmful beliefs and dive into spiritual insights to help you break free from illusions and embrace deeper wisdom. Today, we're diving deep into Peter Enns' book, The Sin of Certainty. We've got a lot to work with. The book, a summary, and an interview.
It's quite the information feast, yeah.
Definitely. And I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation, especially given that the central premise of the book is so thought-provoking.
It is for sure.
It's this idea that maybe our pursuit of certainty in faith is actually what's holding us back in our relationship with God.
Right. And that's such a mind-blowing concept because you'd think certainty would be the goal, right?
It really is. It kind of makes you question everything you thought you knew about faith.
It suggests that maybe it's not about building this perfect system of beliefs,
Right.
but more about something way more dynamic and fluid.
So less about walls and more about bridges.
Exactly. And that's where Enns' whole idea of certainty as a sin comes in.
Yeah, that's a strong word.
It is. It's definitely meant to make you stop and think.
For sure. But how does being certain become a problem?
Well, Enns argues that when we get too fixated on having all the answers, we kind of end up trapping God.
Trapping God.
Yeah, we limit God to what we can understand.
Ah.
Instead of acknowledging the vastness and the mystery of God.
Like trying to fit the ocean into a teacup.
Exactly.
Right.
So instead of focusing on the what of our beliefs, all the doctrines and dogma,
Right.
Enns suggests we shift our focus to the who, the person of God.
So less about having the perfect theological system and more about cultivating a relationship built on trust.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging that we won't have all the answers, and that's okay.
That doubt and uncertainty are just part of the journey.
Right. They're not the enemy.
So how do we even know if we're falling into this sin of certainty trap?
Enns talks about these uh-oh moments, times when life throws something at you that totally clashes with your neat little box of beliefs about God.
I think we've all had a few of those, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely. It could be anything, really, a personal tragedy, a confusing passage in the Bible, just anything that makes you go, wait, if God is good, why is this happening?
Yeah, those moments where it feels like your world is being turned upside down. Do the sources give any specific examples of these uh-oh moments?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There's this one story about a woman who completely lost it when someone referred to God as Father. Turns out her own father had been abusive, so that simple phrase triggered a wave of pain for her.
Oof, yeah, I can see how that would shake you to your core.
Right. It made her question everything she thought she knew about God. It's like those deeply personal experiences have this way of, well, they can really rock the foundations of what we believe. It makes you wonder, are we supposed to just ignore those feelings when our faith gets shaken like that? That's where it gets really interesting. Instead of seeing doubt as the enemy, Enns actually suggests that these uh-oh moments are massive opportunities for growth.
Okay, I'm listening.
They force us to confront our assumptions, wrestle with the hard questions, and ultimately maybe even come to a deeper understanding of God.
So it's not about pretending we have it all figured out.
Not at all. It's more about leaning into those uncomfortable feelings, being honest about our doubts and struggles. That's where the real growth happens.
It's kind of comforting to think about it that way. Because let's face it, we all have doubts sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And it's not like we're the first ones. The sources actually pointed out that even the big names in the Bible had moments of doubt and uncertainty. It makes our own struggles feel a little less, scary, maybe.
Exactly. We often put these biblical figures on a pedestal and forget they were human too. They wrestled with the same big questions we do.
Like who?
Well, take the Psalms, for example. There's one, Psalm 88, that's just raw, gut-wrenching honesty. The writer feels totally abandoned by God, even accuses God of being the cause of his suffering.
Wow. So it's not all sunshine and roses in the Psalms, huh?
Definitely not. And then there's Psalm 89, where the writer starts off praising God's faithfulness, but then just straight up calls God a liar for seemingly breaking his promises.
Okay, so even back then, people were struggling to make sense of God's actions.
And then you've got Psalm 73, where the writer is grappling with that age-old question. Why do bad things happen to good people? It's like he's looking around and wondering, is this really how a loving God operates?
Yeah, I think that's a question we've all asked at some point. Life doesn't always seem fair, does it?
And the Bible doesn't try to sugarcoat any of this. It gives us this raw, unfiltered look at what it means to have faith, doubts, and all.
It's like those writers are giving voice to those feelings of despair we can all feel when we're going through a rough patch. And it's not just the Psalms, right? What about the book of Ecclesiastes? That one always seemed pretty bleak to me.
Oh, yeah. Ecclesiastes is definitely a tough read. The author, thought to be King Solomon, basically concludes that life is meaningless.
Meaningless, even if you follow all the rules.
Yep, even then, he's seen it all, done it all, and he's basically saying it's all vanity. It's definitely not your typical Sunday school lesson.
No kidding.
Yeah.
But it does show that even way back then, people were wrestling with doubt, even those who were considered incredibly wise. And speaking of wrestling with tough questions, we can't forget about Job. Talk about an uh-oh moment. The guy loses everything.
Everything. Family, possessions, health, the works.
And to make matters worse, his friends are no help at all. They basically tell him he must have done something to deserve it.
Right, like somehow it's all his fault. But what's fascinating is that even Job himself demands an explanation from God.
So what does God say?
Well, he doesn't give him a straightforward answer. It's more like God reminds Job of his power and the vastness of creation, basically suggesting that Job can't possibly grasp the full scope of his plan.
It's like God saying, trust me, even if you don't understand.
Exactly. And in the end, that's exactly what Job chooses to do. He chooses to trust, even though he's still hurting, still confused.
But maybe the real question isn't why is this happening, but can I trust God even when it hurts?
You hit the nail on the head. That's the core message these sources are pointing to. It's not about eliminating doubt, it's about building a foundation of trust.
Okay, so we've explored this idea of the sin of certainty, and we've seen how doubt is a normal, even essential part of faith. But now I'm curious, what does it actually look like to live with that trust? How do we move from a faith that's all about having the answers to one that's about trusting God even when things don't make sense?
Well, that's where things start to get really interesting. And we're going to dive into that right after the break.
But how do we actually make that shift? Like, how do we move from a certainty-based faith to one that's rooted in trust? What are some, practical steps we can take?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
Well, Enns suggests starting with some honest self-reflection.
Like, what do you mean?
Ask yourself, why am I clinging to certainty? Is it fear of the unknown, a need for control, or maybe even a desire to feel superior to others?
Ooh, that's getting deep.
It is. But it's important to understand our own motivations so we can start to challenge them.
Right, so it starts with self-awareness.
Exactly. And then from there, Enns encourages us to engage in dialogue with those who hold different views, to read books and listen to podcasts that push us outside our comfort zones, and to cultivate a practice of silence and contemplation.
So basically being open to new perspectives, challenging our assumptions, and creating space for stillness and reflection.
Exactly. It's in those quiet moments when we step away from the noise and the need to have all the answers that we can really start to connect with the deeper mystery of God.
It's like a practice of surrender, letting go, and allowing ourselves to be guided by something bigger than ourselves.
Right. It's about recognizing that we're not in control. But Enns argues that it's actually in that surrender that we find true freedom.
Freedom from what?
Freedom from the fear of making mistakes, freedom from the need to be right, freedom from the limitations of our own understanding.
It's interesting. And that freedom allows us to step into a more, genuine relationship with God.
Exactly, one that's not based on having all the answers, but on a deep and abiding trust.
It made me think about that amazing story about Mother Teresa.
Oh yeah, what was it?
The one where the man asks her to pray for him to have clarity, and her answer is totally unexpected.
I'm all ears.
She says, clarity is the last thing you are clinging to. Until you let go of clarity, you will not know God.
Wow. That is profound. I mean, it just flips the script on how we usually think about faith. We're so used to believing we need to have it all figured out before we can truly connect with God. But what if it's the opposite? What if letting go of that need for certainty opens us up to something much deeper?
It's like leap in the net will appear.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot of faith to actually let go of the edge.
Right. But think about the practical side of this, too. A faith that's solely focused on intellectual certainty. It can actually have some pretty negative consequences in the real world.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, it can make us rigid, judgmental.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that happen, both in religion and just in life in general.
Yeah.
It's like people get so attached to being right that they forget about everything else.
Like we build walls around our beliefs, and anyone who doesn't fit neatly inside those walls, they're seen as outsiders, maybe even enemies.
Yeah, I think it's easy to get caught up in that us versus them mentality.
It is. And
Yep.
when we're so focused on defending our own beliefs, we miss out on chances to learn from others, to grow, to expand our understanding of what it really means to follow God.
So are you saying a trust-centered faith is more about building bridges?
Exact. It's about coming to others with humility, curiosity, a willingness to really listen and learn.
Instead of saying you're wrong, it's more like, help me understand.
Exactly. That kind of openness can lead to incredible connections. It lets us see the image of God reflected in people who might be very different from us.
So this shift from certainty to trust isn't just about our personal relationship with God. It's about how we see and interact with the world around us.
You got it. And honestly, that's where things start to get really exciting. When we let go of that need to control, to be right, to have all the answers, we open ourselves to a whole new way of being, one that's grounded in love, compassion, and a deep trust that God is working even when we can't see it.
It's like trading in our rule books for a compass.
I love that. And one thing that keeps coming up for me as we talk about this is the idea of surrender. Like, if we're truly trusting God, doesn't that also mean letting go of our own agendas and desires?
That's a great question. And it's definitely something that the sources wrestle with. Because it's not always easy, is it? Letting go like that, especially when it clashes with what we want.
Absolutely not. But the sources suggest that surrender isn't about becoming passive or giving up on our dreams.
So what is it about then?
It's more about aligning our desires with God's will, trusting that He has a plan that's bigger than anything we could come up with on our own.
So not suppressing our own will, but surrendering it to something bigger.
Exactly. It's like saying, okay, God, I'm here, I'm open, lead the way. And sometimes that guidance comes in the most unexpected ways. A sudden change of plans, a chance meeting, maybe even a quiet whisper in your heart.
Being open to those little nudges, those moments when you sense God inviting you to step outside your comfort zone.
It's kind of like following a trail through the woods. You don't always see where it's going, but you trust that it will lead you somewhere beautiful.
Okay, that's a nice image. But let's be real, this journey of trusting God doesn't always take us to those beautiful sunny meadows. Sometimes the path gets pretty rough, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the sources are very clear about this. The Christian faith isn't about avoiding suffering. It's about walking through those difficult seasons with God by our side.
So it's not pretending everything's okay, but being honest about the pain.
Exactly. And leaning on God for support. It's trusting that He's there with us every step of the way, even in those dark valleys.
Maybe even especially in those valleys.
Right? It's about finding strength in our vulnerability, recognizing that it's often in those broken places that we're most open to God's love.
And one of the most amazing things about this whole trust thing, it doesn't just impact our relationship with God. It has a ripple effect on how we live our lives.
What do you mean?
Well, when we surrender to God's will, we often find ourselves drawn to acts of service. We start to see the world through a lens of love and empathy, recognizing that we're all connected.
Absolutely. We become less concerned with protecting ourselves and more focused on making a positive impact. It's like our hearts become more attuned to the needs of others.
Exactly. And that shift in focus can be so powerful. It can lead to a life of purpose, of meaning, a life that's aligned with our deepest values.
One area where this shift from certainty to trust can be really challenging is within organized religion. We see these rigid structures and doctrines, and sometimes it can feel so stifling, even judgmental.
Yeah, we're more concerned with following the rules than actually living out our faith.
Right, and Enns really challenges those systems that prioritize right thinking and doctrinal purity above all else.
So what does a more trust-centered approach to religion look like?
Well, imagine a community where relationships are valued more than doctrines, where people feel safe to share their struggles and questions without fear of judgment.
So creating spaces where vulnerability is welcomed, where people can be honest about their doubts without feeling like they have to have all the answers.
Exactly. Shifting the focus from intellectual agreement to shared experience, recognizing that faith is a journey we're all on together.
It's about creating a sense of belonging that goes beyond those doctrinal differences, seeing that common humanity that unites us as children of God.
Exactly. And that kind of unity doesn't mean we have to agree on everything. It's about respecting each other's journeys, even when they look different from our own.
And recognizing that the Spirit moves in mysterious ways, right?
Right. And we don't always need to understand or control how God is working in the lives of others. This trust-centered approach to religion also means we need to challenge those in authority who try to enforce conformity and silence dissent.
Speaking truth to power.
You got it.
It's about taking those values of love, compassion, humility, and making them real in our interactions with others, both inside and outside our faith communities.
Exactly. And those values, they're not just theoretical concepts, they're lived experiences, ones that have the power to transform not just individuals, but communities, even the world.
It sounds like embracing this trust-centered faith is a call to action, to step out of our comfort zones and actually be agents of change.
You hit the nail on the head. It's not just about changing our own beliefs, it's about creating a more just and compassionate world for everyone.
Bringing heaven down to earth, one act of trust at a time.
Beautifully said.
And Enns leaves us with this image. What if instead of clinging to a fixed image of God, we allow ourselves to be shaped and transformed by the encounter? What if the goal isn't to contain God within our understanding, but to be continually surprised, challenged, even unsettled by the mystery?
That's a powerful thought. It's a call to humility.
It is.
To recognize that our human understanding will always be limited.
And that the God we encounter is far vaster, more complex, more loving than we can ever fully grasp.
And maybe that's the point.
Maybe it is. The journey of faith isn't about reaching a final destination, but about embracing the ongoing adventure of walking with God.
Trusting in the mystery and allowing ourselves to be transformed along the way.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive.
It has been.
It's really challenged me to let go of the need for certainty and embrace the freedom that comes from trust.
And I hope it encourages our listeners to do the same.
To lean into those uh-oh moments.
Yes, embrace the questions and trust that even in the midst of uncertainty, you are held in the love and grace of God.
This has been amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the sin of certainty.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.